Hello, and thank you so much for joining the Gold Pill podcast. I am Meredith, and I'm here with my lovely, amazing, talented, beautiful, wonderful co-host, Amy. Hi, Amy. How are you?
Hi, Meredith. I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I am thrilled to be talking to our guest today, who is a brilliant thinker, visionary, mystic, just has a writer, like the qualifications just kind of build on themselves. I would now like to welcome our guest, Randy Maugans. Hi, Randy.
Hey,
Hi,
hello, hello,
Randy.
hello.
Hello,
Both
hello.
of you, Meredith, Amy.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, how's your
My
day going
pleasure.
so far today?
My day is getting brighter. As you
Yes.
can see in the background right now, there's light through that window. There was no light. It was gray all day.
Oh,
So all of a sudden the sun's decided to shine and it's become May-like. Wow, what a concept.
I
yeah.
know. Wow. May weather in May.
Yeah, everything's getting brighter.
Yes, yes. I have been noticing that the weather is very off and very interesting in the last few weeks. I live in the mountains of North Carolina, for anyone who
hmm
doesn't know. And last week we had a frost. I was like, what in the fuck is happening in America? And, that kind of tethers to somewhat our conversation today. And,
Well, since we're going around talking about stuff, since doing the gold pill with the clouds and stuff, I always post about chemtrails and I always knew them, but I've been spotting them more, or whatever we want to call them. They go by it arose by any other name. That's sort of how I look at it. And I've noticed that the more they'll show up and then it'll get cold for like 3 days, and then it'll kind of be like a normal day, maybe a normal couple days, maybe it'll get really hot because I'm in California, and then it's like bam, back down to like 10 degrees colder than yesterday, so it's weird, very weird.
Yeah, it's making it more challenging, at least here, to grow food, which I know
Definitely.
that there's definitely there's a natural part of this, I think, and then there's a unnatural part of it, right? Of the weather and the weirdness. And
Yeah, definitely an interaction of the two.
so
This is it's a battle. And what's going on above us, below us? This is
Mm.
all a war of the old gods versus, I guess, the new gods to kind of follow the American gods plot line of
Mhm.
if you look at the weather, and weather seems so mundane. We talk about it, and it's like, is that all we've got to talk about is the weather? Well, it's kind of important.
Mhm.
And what I notice is that temperatures, how do I put this? The physics is breaking down. I think I've said this before
yes,
somewhere, that the actual temperature that is posted, if you go to like your weather app on your phone, which is what most of us do
Yes.
now, the ambient temperature will say it's 51 degrees, and you go
Uh-huh.
outside and you go, oh no, that is not 51 degrees. I don't ever remember 51 degrees feeling like that. It's like unreasonably intemperate.
mm-hmm.
So however they're logging temperatures, there's another factor that's come in. There's a coldness that's come into the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
That's part of the shadow wars, the overworld, the underworld kind of dueling back and forth. And what's breaking down here in Midgard is a lot of our known physics.
Yes,
Mm. Does that
definitely.
play in with the magnetosphere?
It's just what I was going to ask. Literally, I was going to be like, don't you feel like that shit's like a piece of Swiss cheese at this point?
Yeah.
Well, when you consider how important magnetics are, even to our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm.
we have ferric oxide in our blood, which obviously affects things like perception of temperature, blood circulation, all of the things that go into that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm not an expert on like the science behind this. More the metaphysics of it's what's interesting is that we've been going through, we are in technically a solar minimum right now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The sun itself is so misunderstood. We could
Yes.
do like 3 hours on the sun and what it really is. Most people
I
think the
love
sun's
that.
a gas giant.
Right.
They think it's a ball of fire. It's not. This goes into the wave, by the way.
Yes.
It goes into the
Yes.
concepts of what comprises the intelligent universe of which we are a part. And all of that is now rapidly shifting in ways that are challenging traditional science, traditional perspective of what really comprises our physical world and our physical universe.
Absolutely. I could go off on several tangents about like how we're conditioned to believe that space is, because I think in order to understand whatever the super wave is, in order to get a sense maybe for like what could be happening in the cosmos right now, because we feel it. I mean, the hermetic law of like correspondence applies, where it's like as above so below, as within so without. We feel it happening like in our cells, in our body. You know, but it is like
You feel it accelerating almost.
yes, I feel, well, that's what I feel, and also
Yeah.
it's like it's a combination.
Yeah, it's distortion. Yeah.
But I think that the conditioning that we're brought under, like the NASA sort of stuff, and like some of the, you know, the space is wide and out there and it's vast and it has nothing to do with you, because we live in a chaotic, completely random universe, totally not infused with any type of divine intelligence or order, and there's no meaning, no purpose, just existential questions that have to be answered, of course, by NASA officials, government officials, science. It's the whole like, if you don't believe in a God, then you're easier, or in some spiritual principle, whatever that is, you're more likely to accept like a government or
authority,
a big man in a lab coat as your source of life, information. Truth. Yeah. Truth.
Yeah. So science is the new religion. It has been for, you know, it's probably since the time of at least Newton, Galileo, go back to that. The new gods then were the gods who moved inside of the religious system to basically flatten our perceptions, which our consciousness, going back into ancient times, and you can prove this by looking even at the Egyptian culture, that there was a consciousness about what we now call space, what they would have referred to as the heavens. I call it the sky clock, the realms seemingly above us. And this was the realm of the gods as they understood it then, the sky gods. And of course, the Egyptians lived in a time when there were still beings upon this world who were, in fact, those beings, those ancient primordial sky gods, now what we call extraterrestrials. And their awareness of the heavens was not perceived as something distant, but something that was a part of them. The consciousness was different.
Yeah.
And the flattening of consciousness came with the advent of organized religions that moved out of the if you look at the Druids, you look at the pagan rites, and go and look at some of the ancient sites, you realize that there was a magnification of the celestial. And the celestial was not greater than, it was a part of the being, it's ourselves. We ourselves as beings on earth reverence the heavens as being both something we understood was a primary causative sphere, and at the same time something that connected deeply inside of us. And that was lost because organized religion came in and basically began to flatten the field. They created a god in their own image, and they created a deity which was separate both from us and separate from our worldview.
Mhm.
Our worldview being no longer connected to that realm, but cut off. This is literally the meaning of the fall in
Yeah.
Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, because okay, so say one part of the population is extricating their source of information, divinity, truth, light, whatever, to some type of lab coat man, math man. And then the other part is like, sky daddy, I must, almost becomes very much like, savior energy, or like, this thing out here is somehow like, looking out for me and watching over me specifically in like a very anthropomorphized, like specific way. And I really feel that, maybe some of these ideologies, maybe this is the whole point of everything that we're doing, right? Is that some of these ideologies came in right in time for the wave on purpose, like to stunt our development and to really just flatten us into these two-dimensional pancakes, like,
Earthlocked people.
Yeah, earth poop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, wow, where do we even unpack all that? The separation from our consciousness from the cosmic reality, we'll call it that, was extended over probably 700 to 500 years. And, pardon me, as we got into what we call the 20th century, science became in the ascendant. This begins with Darwinism, really. Darwin formalized a system that basically reduced us to nothing much more than ectoplasm that crawled out of the swamp.
Just a collection of
Man
cells.
had no divine origin. It was simply
A
an
clump
organism.
of cells. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is funny how, sorry, just I don't want to totally derail the conversation because we're going some very great places, but the clump of cells thing, I don't want to loosh into it, but like it is funny to see how that has played out over time into how that has, what that has done to the culture's view of life, let's say.
That we justify what we do to clumps of cells.
Yes.
Like morally.
And so if we are just clumps of cells, it's just very interesting. No, it's just interesting how the idea of Darwinism has radiated over time into where we are now, which is a clump of cells being something that we're talking about a lot. And I don't want to derail, but it has played out in a very interesting way. That's all. I think it has shaped the way we look at humans, at ourselves, obviously, immensely. And so thank you for pointing that out, Randy.
Just a random clump of cells that exists on a petri dish that has no divinity or no natural like connection. It's that atheistic, materialistic, Ahrimanic,
clinical,
very like
cold.
It's reductionism.
Yeah,
It basically
absolutely
takes something that had a symmetry and a beauty to it, something that was divinely woven, and it took it and reduced it down to cells and particles and nerves in a way that we became less than the divine beings that we were and are. So in the 20th century, what you really saw was man flattened. I mean, talk about flat earth. Well, consciousness is the sphere in which we really dwell, and we basically had our entire creation flattened as a result of mechanistic, science-based inquiries, which did exactly what, the reductionism. Rather than looking beyond and inside, we were forced to look outside and then look through microscopes and telescopes, little pieces of glass, to find the truth about ourselves, when in fact, we never needed those.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
To get back into how we're being primed for this time, how there's the wave that's coming, and then you were also mentioning how there's these movements that are either engineered or happening in very divinely timed ways. I wanted to kind of explore that more because I didn't want, I derailed, so I wanted to get us back on.
Oh, good. I would love to know, like, Randy, just, I'm going to go ahead and like pop the question. What do you think that the wave is? And like, have you seen visions of it? And like, what were those like for you, and etc. Just a couple quick, easy questions.
First, the wave, that was a term that our friend Shane used maybe 5 or 6 years ago to explain energies that were coming into the earth at that time, and both prior to that and subsequently, as we're living in a period of time when there's a very intense amount of cosmic activity. So what we call the wave is fundamentally energies that are coming into the earth as part of the quickening of man's consciousness as we walk towards Aquarius. Now, it's arguable about exactly when the Aquarian age begins.
Yeah.
The mystery schools of the early 20th century were already pointing to it as early as probably 1920s. And they were preparing for it then. You began to see an uptick in mystical activity, the real mystery schools, the schools that sit in the background.
Right.
And certainly by the time that we hit the post-World War II period, after 1945, there's these first pulses starting to come in. It ramps up over a 20-year period into the 1960s. And you have then an explosion of something. And that explosion is a form of consciousness that was coming in at that time, probably beginning right around 1960, certainly by 1967 and forward. You had a shift in values. You had a culture that grew up, a generation which is largely, my generation, that grew up with a different perspective than our parents. Our parents grew up in that World War II and post-World War II period in a very different world than the perspective that we held. And unless you were there, you wouldn't understand how palpable it actually was to be part of what they then called the youth culture. I sort of got the back end of it in the 70s, but I knew a lot of the people that were, part of the forefront of that, like serious hippie type people who were back to earthers, people who were promoting free thought, new ideas about exactly what we were talking about earlier. This awakening consciousness, this sense that we had been unplugged from something that was so critical. And that was the big splash when some of these energies really began to hit. We had marker events along the way. We had the harmonic convergence, which was, when was that? Probably
like 80, 81, 82, something?
Yeah, somewhere in around there. We've had a number of these type of events, which were markers that we were putting pins in the map going this. And all of this is a ramp up heading towards what we later understood would be the 2012 event. Now, we're already in these waves coming in. There's no going back for this. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Correct.
But as a result of what happened in the 60s, the controllers on this world, who are henchmen for the more, how do I want to put this? the henchmen for, we will say, the inside cabal group, what you might consider the higher elite controlling groups, which themselves are also being controlled.
Right.
They began to install their own systems as an overlay on top of the consciousness movement. So at every step along the way, where you had what you would call a New Age movement, you had a false New Age movement.
Right.
Absolutely.
You had false awakenings. You had, after Woodstock, you had Altamont. And if you know what Altamont was,
Yes.
that was the Rolling Stones concert in 1969, where the Hells Angels basically killed a guy right in front of the stage while they were filming it. There's a movie out there, Gimme Shelter. That was sort of the dark night of the soul for the hippie movement, which moved you into this much darker period of time. Now, these are cultural markers. Understand that I don't think Woodstock itself was organic. That was a planned event as well. So actually a film, it was actually a film stage.
Yes.
They were making a movie.
Absolutely.
Well, if you think about like that time and, you know, what was surrounding that, like the hippie movement, there was a war going on. And there is actually like a pulse in people that says, hey, hang on a second, this construct that we know of as war maybe shouldn't exist. And why is this happening? And what the fuck is going on? Right. And so to me, like, if I were to like occupy the perspective of the controllers, which I really like, it's not like the greatest feeling to start thinking like a sociopath, but whenever, you know, 2020 came in and all of the Sharona nonsense started, I was just, it was like my brain suddenly opened up into like looking at things maybe more tactically or more strategically. But if I were in their shoes, you know, I would definitely not want a movement that is anti-war, and I wouldn't want a movement that, you know, like you said, like accelerates people's consciousness. So what I saw, and I wasn't alive during the hippie movement, but what I did see is that people went from us to me. And, you know, the sort of like influence of substances and different types of harder drugs, like, you know, and I know that that was probably always part of it, but just,
So well, you had the me generation, which was, of course, the 70s. That's my generation. You know, to a large degree, what's the old saying? We got the hangover, but never went to the party.
Totally.
A lot of people in the 70s were very hedonistic. And even in the 60s, they were. There was a liberation that was going on. And there was a consciousness that was coming out at that time. Bear in mind, this is the time not only of Vietnam War, but civil rights, big time. You know, I can disagree with the concept of civil rights on a legal basis, but the fundamentals of human rights you can't disagree with. You had the civil rights movement, you had the beginning of the women's rights movement, the early feminist movement. First wave feminists, not third wave feminism.
Right.
And that goes, you know, when you get to third wave feminism, you're into critical theory, and that dovetails right over into where we are today.
Definitely.
But early feminism was actually based on some very good things, and it was recognizing that women were competent, women were capable of amazing things, that they had a place other than inside the home as mothers. And there was a lot of valid arguments behind the movement, although it got hijacked. You know, you have civil rights, you have women's rights, you have the gay rights movement, you have this sense that humanity is trying to break out of this Puritan, Protestant, Catholic religious structure in some very big ways. And so what happens along the way is the culture changes along with it. Were these hijacked? Of course they were hijacked. Um, I think when you look at any movement, mass movement, you have to understand there's space there that's opened up for the controllers to step in and hijack arguments.
Right.
So, you have to look at it on the more organic scope and reason from the primary, which is what is a human being? What is their place in this world? And are we truly equal? And are we truly able to express ourselves fully as conscious spirit beings?
Yeah.
And that's where I always drive the argument back down to. If it becomes politicized, if it becomes dogmatic, then you have a movement that's being hijacked.
Oh, yeah. When the corporations start showing interest and backing it, and, I mean, there's plenty of other signals for how to, I think, tell that something has been kind of co-opted. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting too, as you're talking, I'm kind of like, it's interesting that we're kind of we're in a proxy war with Ukraine, with like Russia. I mean, we're not like not at war right now, right?
Oh, we are at war. No, we are at war.
Well, right. And the war has been going on for quite a long time. Arguably, it never stopped after World War II, and, has been escalating spiritually too. I mean, for me, I think 2015 to 2018 was like the most brutal initiation with regards to facing things like attachments and demons. And, it's like, there's a lot of shit out there that wants us to somehow fuck this up. And so what is so, magical about this wave, or this, these particles, or these neutrinos, or, the plasma? I mean, it's just like, there's so many different words for it, but
and it's all of that, and it's none of it, because really what it is in the end, it is information. And because we don't really, when you start to talk about space, because of the map that has been drawn for us, we have boundaries of distances and magnitudes and sizes of worlds and magnitudes of suns and stars. And it's funny because when you begin to look at the proportional distances to all of these, you wonder, did they reverse all the mathematics in a way to make it work? Because they all seem to be just the right distances that we can explain proportional sizes of different bodies in ways that make it seem huge. But, and I don't want to go too far away from this because I want to stay close to where we started with the wave. The structure of what we understand as the universe gives us an unexplainable distance, an unexplainable expanse, which makes it unreachable in terms of our consciousness. Large numbers have the ability to basically dwarf the human intelligence. Nobody really, you take anything beyond 3 digits, 4 maybe. After you start tacking zeros on, it becomes unreal because we can't imagine it.
Right.
You don't really ever get to count something in millions in real world.
Right.
Certainly not money for the most part. And even if you do, it's an abstraction. So miles, light years, these are abstractions of distances that were assigned through a scientific system, which also assigned it a structure and said that the sun is the center of the solar system and everything else stages out around it, swirling balls around swirling balls, which creates a structure that we then think of as a solar system inside of a galaxy, inside of a universe, or I guess now we're at multiverses, which we could talk about multiverses if we understood the universe, but I'd prefer to just leave it.
That's a very good point.
Concept.
Yes.
You have to call things something.
Yes.
The taxonomy is that we're beings who classify, we're beings who measure, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of our nature. But would you really understand the galactic system, for instance, in relationship to the solar system? And what is that? And how is that structured? And how does that move? What is space? Is space really a vacuum? If space is really a vacuum, how and how are you traveling in it with propulsive vehicles?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
How are
And
you taking solid fuel rockets and going hundreds of thousands of miles off planet?
Absolutely.
If you do the math on the fuel that's required for that, based on their own specifications, I want to know why and how I don't get a car that has the kind of mileage that they got out of those rockets, because it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. The payloads alone were over 1,000,000 pounds. The ability to lift that, to thrust it, and then to travel it out into space seems to me, and I'm not the only one, there's a book out there, it's called Moongate, and I don't remember the author's name, who challenges all of these numbers in real world terms. So
Mm.
we have to ask the question, physically, what are we dealing with? And what we're
Mhm.
dealing with is something that we don't understand. And what we've been sold is a media campaign by an entertainment company that we call NASA,
Yep.
who sold us the idea
Wow.
that
Yeah.
basically we are going into space. And now we have a new kid on the block, Elon Musk, and he wants to take us to Mars to
Mm.
start colonizing Mars, a
To
planet.
start colonizing Mars in
Right.
quotes, because that's never happened. That's never been done before or anything. Dot dot dot. You know, just like
So at the same time, I mean, this is the guy who also has talked about, you know, the brain chip,
yep.
and his competitor, Mr. Zuckerberg, and his Meta Corporation want to give us the metaverse, which basically is, from my standpoint, a holographic silo for human souls.
Oh my God, me too, Randy.
You know, that would be what we've called the simulacrum. It would be
100.
what, you know, Shane has talked about with the machine. And I don't think we're there,
Hmm.
but I do think we're headed there if we're not
Mhm.
cautious. Because what Musk is proposing is simply an expansion of the NASA program with a simulated reality concept built on top of it.
And that is something that I did not mean to cut you off. I apologize, but that is something that I happen to notice is like, why are we hearing about things like Neuralink and Metaverse when humans suddenly become space curious? You know, why?
The
And I think
inversion is real.
because in order for them to, they would have to fucking fess up that they lied about everything, that they lied about
Right.
space, that they lied about human origin and history, that they lied about, you know, all of the different things. They would have to fess up to that in order for us to actually go to quote space, because space does not exist. Like, that's my theory. Not that it doesn't exist, but that it's not like in any way, shape, or form what like we've been sold that it is. So, oh, here, you know, you can connect your brain to a computer. We'll simulate space for you, you stupid peasant. Eat your bugs, you know, it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
So, as always, you know, from my perspective, we work from the inner worlds to the outer worlds. The
Yes.
cosmos is within you.
Yes.
And we've lived in an inversion where everything is externalized, everything is magnified beyond our ability to even comprehend, much less have access.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, what is going on is the opposite of meta, it's the opposite of Neuralink. It is that we are in a world in which we create a reality from our own inner beings. And we do this as beings who have both a collective consciousness as a race of people. We co-create. I hate that term, but we
Mm-hmm.
use it. At the same time, we are creating our own realities, All of these come from a place inside of us, which is actually what space really is. It's an inversion. We create from the inside out and we project the reality of the world around us. The reason that we're not aware of this and we don't, quote, manifest, another New Age term that is kind of trite. The reason why we don't materialize at the level that we should be able to, and I'm talking even just on a mundane level, simple things that we should be able to do, like self-healing, sustenance in terms of basic things like food and energy. All of these things have been walled off from us because our consciousness was restricted.
Yeah.
We live in our physicality is a restricted consciousness by definition. We're aware of one reality when in fact there are many realities. And because, as we pointed out at the beginning of this, there's no time. Therefore, everything sort of occurs simultaneously. But your restrictive consciousness can't handle that. You can taste it. There are times when you can access multiple realities. We have the ability to move between different realities. But at the current time, because of the way we have been pulled into the current funnel of consciousness, that's a prescription for madness. Most people can't handle it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which is where we find ourselves.
Yeah.
And hello to you all. I listened to the song Let's Go Crazy by Prince the other day. And, he was a really big, I think this is just my opinion, with whatever this wave is, it's everything, it's nothing, it's a little bit of everything in between. Purple Rain, I mean, that's pretty significant disclose of what this potentially could be, look like, whatever. But I think that the song Let's Go Crazy describes that sort of like fragmentation or breakdown of time. And just some people, it's like you have to do a level of, I think, inner inquiry and like also, sitting with yourself so that you can hold a certain energy to be able to like really hold it. I mean, I struggled to hold it not yesterday, but the day before yesterday. Speaking of Shane, he like talked me through a panic attack because I was like, all of these pieces of ourselves are coming back, is what I wonder about.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, what we've undergone is kind of a Worldscale MK Ultra program.
We're not kidding.
We have been fractured. And so we have aspects of ourselves that are scattered and shattered. And what Prince was talking about, what's so interesting about some of these entertainers is, so the programs beginning in the 1950s, probably even going back earlier to the 40s, but certainly by the 50s, they had begun to understand how to create certain artistic types. Programs profiled based on a number of factors, including past life, where they were able to pull from a person aspects of themselves that were prone towards certain talents. So people who were gifted were oftentimes pulled into programs and either clandestinely or just overtly used to funnel very talented people out into the entertainment system, Hollywood, music industry, publishing, and people like Prince. And earlier model of Prince would have been Jimi Hendrix. And if you go back and look at Jimi Hendrix, what he was talking about, he basically alluded that it was documented. Hendrix shot, I think right before he died, he did a film in Hawaii called Rainbow Bridge. And during the filming of that, UFOs showed up all over the place. This was on the island of Maui. Hendrix talked, he recorded songs about experiences with extraterrestrials. Prince is kind of like the extension of the Hendrix energy. I mean, listen to his guitar playing. But it had some added layers to it. He clearly, the guy was funky. The guy was, he was poetic. He was exotic in a way that the culture at the time was kind of bracing for. Late 1970s, when he emerged through the 80s, he perfected art forms. He perfected, the video, his film, Purple Rain. These were projections onto the human landscape, the mindscape of humanity by artists. And sometimes they got out into the wild and they couldn't be controlled anymore. They just became a force of nature. I think David Bowie was like this to a great degree.
Totally. Absolutely. So, yeah.
So these are projections of beings who already saw the future. They saw their future selves. They communicated it through music and art and film in ways that were kind of encrypted.
Yes.
And some of it, some scare the controllers a lot, enough that they would, eventually have to kind of take them down. So if you look at the end of people like Prince, there's something wrong with what happened, with Prince.
Yeah.
His sudden demise.
Absolutely.
You can say that for a lot of these visionaries. But the projects were funneling their own product out into the media, the entertainment industry. So you have a lot of people who are so gifted and so beautiful, but they're also so broken that they would just melt down on their own accord as well. And those were the ripples of consciousness coming through. They want to control this. They always want to control it. What they can't control is what's going on both inside of us and the projection of what's going on externally in the sky above us. So if you take the wave and what the wave is, I'll try to put a bow on this. The wave is energy which is being conducted from what we would call the central sun. In terms of our galactic system, there is a central sun. That central sun is the server. You would say it's kind of the God source. It's an information portal.
Totally.
And distributed networks of suns and worlds around them are connected through the currents of subspace frequencies in ways that it's very difficult to understand. We don't have language for this in traditional science.
Right.
So in 2019, I was beginning to do the Eye of the Needle, and I did the Winter Solstice show, and I talked about the fact that scientists had at that point in time mapped an energy blast that had come in from the sun. It had hit in Eastern Europe. Interesting that.
Right.
And it was mapped by scientists. And this was talked about by the occultists at the time as being one of these wave bursts. And this occurred, that was I guess it was 2020 when we had the Saturn Capricorn. But a year earlier, we had some interesting conjunctions going on as well. And I don't remember all of them right now.
You're talking about December 2019?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Totally.
It was off the charts. And we knew something was coming.
Yeah.
We didn't know what. I mean, I did the first Eye of the Needle show on Halloween of 2019. That was kind of me putting the pin in the map. Something's happening. That show was called Emergency.
Emerge in the Sea. And what
see.
And
what is this sea you speak of? Is this the
Well,
womb
the sea
of
was
all
basically
wombs?
whatever we're going to go through.
Yes.
We may not know what it is, but we sense that it's coming, and we sense that it's huge and it's going to be impactful. So in 2019, we weren't there yet. We just, everybody got blindsided by what occurred in March of 2020. Really, that whole thing started a lot sooner than that. And I've told you, Meredith, that I was extremely ill on Thanksgiving of 2019.
wow.
And I got better, and then I got sick again, and then I wound up in the hospital. So whatever the couve is, it was already in the wild out there at that time.
That's right.
You know, but it was being primed. The pump was being primed at that point. And that was, again, another event, much like you would pinpoint any, 9/11 would probably be its earliest, most recent antecedent in terms of an event that was that impactful.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Definitely had a lot of similar astrology to September 11th for sure. And yeah, so what I think we might do is save the rest of this juicy, delicious conversation about the super wave for our patrons and for Randy's patrons as well. You can find him on Patreon at Off Planet Media, and there will be an assortment of description or links that you can find his work because he is a national treasure.
Yes, we love Randy.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank you for having me on. And
we will see y'all on the other side.